So today I want to talk about integers, absolute value, and opposites. To talk about a couple of definitions here, the first thing I would say is that opposites are numbers that are the same distance from zero on different sides of the number line. And what I simply mean by that is if you look at a problem like, or you look at something like this, we would say that 3 and negative 3 are opposites because 3 is 1, 2, 3 spots. Negative 3 is 3 spots away from 0. And positive 3 is again 1, 2, 3 spots away from 0. So we would say that negative 3 and 3 are opposites. In the same way, we would say that negative 5 and positive 5 are opposites. It says the distance from 0. It says 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces away from 0. And then positive 5 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces away from 0. So we would say that 5 and negative 5 are opposites. That's a pretty basic definition for you. The second thing I want to mention is that if we look at the definition of integers, we mean all whole numbers and their opposites. When we talk about whole numbers, we're talking about numbers that are greater than 0. So again, if you go back here to the number line, what we're basically saying is our definition of integers is any number on this number line. Whole numbers would be all these numbers here, and their opposites will be all the numbers over here. So we think about a number line. This number line has an arrow because it goes on to positive infinity. You have 8, you have 9, you have 10. It goes on forever. Same here. We have negative 8, negative 9, and it goes in to negative infinity. So integers are whole numbers and their opposites. Now, the main word I want to focus on during this session is what is the definition of absolute value? It is a number's distance from 0 on a number line. I want to highlight that. It's a number's distance from 0 on a number line. And we use these little bars right here to denote absolute value. So this is the absolute value of 3. This is the absolute value of negative 4. So let's take the absolute value of 3. So we're saying basically what is the distance 3 is from 0 on the number line. Okay, so let's take a look at the number line. What is the absolute value of 3? Well, if we look at 3, how far away is it from 0? Well, here we go. It's 1, 2, 3 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. Now, if we look at the absolute value of negative 4, and I'll look at this. Okay, let's go back over here. The absolute value of negative 4. So basically it's saying the distance that negative 4 is from 0 on the number line. Okay, let's go back over here. Let's look at the absolute value, and that's the sum of absolute value of negative 4. Well, how far away is negative 4 from 0? Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces from 0. So the absolute value of negative 4 is 4, because it's 4 spots away from 0. All right, let's take a look at another one. What's the absolute value of negative 6? Well, let's find negative 6 on the number line and count how far away it is from 0. Well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. Let's take the absolute value of 5. How far away is 5 from 0? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5 spaces away. So what you can see is absolute value is always positive. The absolute value of 3 is positive 3. Absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4. Absolute value of negative 6 is positive 6. And the absolute value of 5 is 5. So what we could say is the answer to an absolute value problem is always positive. The answer to an absolute value problem is always positive. The reason why that's true is because remember our definition, we're talking about distance. When you think of distance, I like to think of a ruler. Okay? Think about a ruler. Ruler always measures in a positive sense. Even if you put the ruler down here on the negative end and you're going to measure the distance between negative 5 and 0, it's still going to be, let's say, if these were each inches, 5 inches away. If you go into Home Depot or Lowe's and ask for a piece of wood, you would never say, can I have a -4-foot piece of wood? Because distance is not negative. We think of distance as being in the positive. So absolute value is always, always, always positive because it's measuring distance. So if you look at this statement right here, could the absolute value of 6 be -6? We think about it for a minute, the answer has to be no, because the absolute value of 6 is +6, and that could never equal -6. Okay? Absolute value of -1800 would be +1800. Absolute value of 0 would be 0, and so on. Now, I want to go back to our conversation on opposites for just a minute. What is the opposite of 3? Well, that's going to be, I think we all know that, is going to be -3. Opposite of 3 is -3. Same distance from 0, opposite sides of the number line. What's the opposite of -3? Well, +3. Again, if we go look at our number line down here, -3 and +3 are each the same distance away from 0. Now, this is the part that trips students up, and we'll end with this. What is the opposite of the absolute value of 3? What is the opposite of the absolute value of 3? Well, to be able to determine this, you first have to know what the absolute value of 3 is. So I'm going to cross out 3 and say the absolute value of 3 is 3. It's 3 spaces away from 0. So then read the question again. So what's the opposite of 3? Oh, well, that's -3. Let's try the second problem. What's the opposite of the absolute value of -3? First, I have to know what this is. The absolute value of -3 is +3. So what's the opposite of +3? Well, that's got to be -3. I want to introduce you to this little negative sign outside the absolute value. That simply means opposite. So this could read, what is the opposite of the absolute value of 32? Let's do the same thing we did up here. What's the absolute value of 32? It's +32. What's the opposite of 32? -32. What is the opposite of the absolute value of -10? Well, if the absolute value of -10 is +10, the opposite of 10 is -10. So let's take a look at this for a second. If the answer to an absolute value problem is always positive, if we're going to take the opposite of absolute value, if we're going to take the opposite of absolute value, guess what our answer always has to be? Negative. So absolute value is always positive. If we took the opposite of something that's positive, it's always going to be negative. That's it.